Hello and welcome to today's edition of Your Questions Answered with Father Gruner. I'm John Veneri. In this program, we take the questions that you send us via email. Father Gruner answers them, we talk about them, and continue to send them to us. You can see the email at the bottom of the screen, questions@thefatimacenter.com. All right, this question goes on for a little bit. Shall I read the whole things through and then we'll bring it apart?
I want to take it apart because otherwise
we'll take it apart. Okay, yeah, because anyway, here we are. A viewer says, I was interested to hear you say that if a couple is not open to life, their Catholic marriage is invalid.
Well, I'd like to clarify that.
That should be clarified, yes.
Okay, first of all, the idea is that, as I've explained on another question recently here, that first of all, a marriage is a contract between three people, okay? Or if you want to say the Blessed Trinity and the man and the woman. But a man, a woman, and God have to agree for every marriage. That is that the man accepts the woman and takes the woman as his wife. The woman takes the man as her husband. And they both are saying that we are getting married. So the purpose of marriage is the procreation and education of children. So if a person gets married and says, I'm going to use the privileges of marriage, but I'm not going to accept children, then the marriage is invalid from the conception, from the very beginning of it. Mm-hmm. Because, as you know, marriage is not...
They go into marriage saying, we're not having children.
Yeah. And so they're going to use either some sort of mechanical device or some sort of pill, whatever it is, but they're going to see to it, and that's their intention from the beginning. It's stated up front, or certainly the intention of one of them, never mind the intention of both. If one of them has that intention,
yes, that's true, yes.
That's enough to invalidate the marriage, because then they didn't make the contract with God. God is saying, if you're getting, God made every one of us, but speaking to that couple, God made the man, God made the woman, and He gave them the power of sacred procreation, of cooperating with God and bringing new life into the world, new human life into the world. That power is a sacred power, and God says you can use it only in the institution of marriage for the purpose I made it. Mm-hmm. So if they say they're going to use this power, but not for the purpose they made it, so they're going to frustrate, fundamentally, so that they can't have children, then they haven't got married, because he didn't give them authority to use this power without leaving Him open to. It's God who creates. It's God, but God will not create without the cooperation of a man and a woman, and that cooperation, if they're saying, well, and He's not going to give that, God does bring children to people who are not married, but the point is that His law is that they're supposed to do it only in marriage. Secondly, is that if they frustrate that in the very contract of saying I do to the husband and wife, God is saying, well, I don't accept this term, because you're frustrating the purpose of which you're coming together in this solemn ceremony to say we're all agreeing on this. We're all contracting. And that's the point. So it's not that they're not open. In other words, let's just say if a woman is known to be infertile, or the man for that matter, but they're not saying we're going to do anything to prevent it. In the case of Saint Elizabeth, she was sterile, but mm-hmm. but God can make the person who's sterile not sterile anytime He wants to, as long as they're not doing anything positive to prevent it.
Yes.
Okay. So it's not a question of being open. I don't like the word. The word open is a nice word, but it doesn't fit here. I want to be very precise in what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and the next thing where they say is, I've been told a contracepting couple's marriage is also invalid. That's not necessarily true.
Not necessarily true. If they decide to do it, if they haven't decided before the contract, before the marriage, that they're not going to have any more children, it's still a mortal sin. Each and every act of contraception between a married couple is still a mortal sin, but it doesn't invalidate the marriage.
Yes.
They could have changed their opinion, their intentions later on. That doesn't invalidate the marriage. I just want to be very sure on this thing. Okay, so
now the person is going to take this, what we talked about, and then apply it to something else, which is kind of interesting. My question is, are there things such as this that means the election of a particular pope is invalid? I see a problem with Pope Francis that he's not, in a manner of speaking, open to the life of the church. Mainly the idea that we do not need to evangelize, and there is salvation outside the church, which is what he holds, and even for atheists. If the church is our mother, how can there be life for the soul to be had from somewhere else?
Well, first of all, before getting into the particulars of his question, are there things such as, are there things, we won't say as such as this, but we can come back to the such as this, are there things that means the election of a particular pope is invalid? And the answer is yes. If a pope were, and in fact this is a famous case in history, which St. Bernard and St. Norbert, and I wish I could remember the name of the pope, and St. Bernard, on the basis, it was Pier di Leone, it was the anti-pope at the time, and yet he had the majority of the cardinals vote for him. Mind you, canonically, the election took place in the morning with another conclave. That's a long historical, but on the basis of what Peter di Leone stood for, they said he's not Catholic. And both St. Norbert and St. Bernard came to the same conclusion, independent of each other, and their reputation for sanctity, especially St. Bernard, was so great that ultimately he prevailed. But not without a struggle, shall we say, or not without some time frame in between. The real Pope had to flee for his life for a period. But St. Bernard was right, that Peter Leone was not Catholic. And as such, and it was not a question about he made a mistake, or he didn't know, he wasn't ignorant about some particular point of doctrine. He wasn't Catholic completely. I mean, he had no Catholic sense. He just wasn't Catholic. He never converted, or never abandoned his previous position, whatever it was. And it was obvious to anyone who knew it. I said, he can't be the Pope. He's not Catholic. On the basis of that, he could declare the second conclave invalid. And he was proved right by history.
But there was another pope at the time as well?
Well, the story, it's a longer story, yes. There was a pope elected in the morning, and the other was elected in the afternoon.
I see.
Okay, and it was based on, an agreement from the previous pope leaving, that he just commissioned these 6 cardinals to choose the next pope. But the others didn't know it, but it didn't matter. That was the law. And but St. Bernard didn't have all this benefit of all this canonical argument. He just, this man's not Catholic. That's enough. He can't be Pope. And so now he's a saint. Okay. So just to answer the question, are there things that can make a particular Pope invalid? And yes, the answer is yes. But those are very specific things. But if he's not Catholic from the beginning, now there are those who say that about Pope Francis. He's not been Catholic for a long time, if ever. But anyway, that's another. It's not bringing. But he's asking the question then, since this Pope is basically shepherding the Church, but he's saying you don't have to be Catholic to be saved. You don't have to, and anyone you can be.
Proselytism is something that you shouldn't be doing.
Well, proselytism may be a bad word. You should be evangelizing, okay? And so.
But they've redefined evangelization. But we can talk about that another time.
The whole point is that, why does a person? It comes to a larger question. If a pope tells you to do something, do you have to obey him? Well, the first rule is, does he have jurisdiction for that? And so, I mean, all authority comes from God. And certainly the Pope has more authority than anybody else. But even the Pope's authority is restricted. And it should be pointed out that the authority of the Pope is for the building up the kingdom of God. Building up the church is not for destruction of a church. So if the Pope were to do something to destroy the church, you not only should you not obey him, you should see that others don't obey him and obstruct his order.
Robert Bellarmine said that to see that his orders are not obeyed.
Yes.
To work to that his orders are not obeyed.
Yeah, and so the idea, first of all, that so if a pope were to do that, now sometimes it's happened with Pope Paschal II. I mean, it was a particular situation. He wanted the advance of the church, but he gave an order which was bad for the church, and the bishops at the time understood it was bad for the church, and they didn't obey him. And for 5 years they had a standoff from 1111 to 1116. I read about that in my book here in a bit more detail. But the point I'm getting at is that not every order, just because it comes from a pope, it has to be followed. In fact, some of them have to be disobeyed. So it doesn't happen every day, but there are things like that. So if somebody says, if Francis is saying, don't evangelize, you have to say, I'm sorry.
The true sense of the word. Yeah.
Don't evangelize or don't proselytize, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Don't try to make converts.
The whole idea is that's wrong. And you can't obey him to something like that. Okay. And if he says that there's salvation outside the Catholic Church, he's a heretic. Is he a formal heretic or a material heretic? He should know better. He's certainly ignorant if he says that. And he could be a heretic if he does know and he's contradicting it. But I am not in a position to know which of those two positions he holds. Maybe one day I will be, but I don't have that right now. But certainly the church is the mother and is supposed to be bringing forth new supernatural life for more souls to bring them to heaven. That's its purpose. And anything that's stopping that, and if if this is, shall we say, foundational to his personality, then this could be something that could be argued that he's not Catholic.
Mhm.
Okay. So, and as you know, Sochi's coming out with a book, or is coming out with a book, which says Benedict is still the Pope, and that Benedict did not resign validly, and therefore is still the Pope. I believe that's what his book is about. I have not read it yet, but
it's going to be released in October, and it's and we mentioned that before in these programs. In fact, this is the difficulty when proper procedure is not followed.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that Benedict resigned, but insisted on being Pope Emeritus, insisted on wearing white, and other things,
and insisted on still having the ministerium, the ministry of the papacy.
Yes.
That is fundamental.
So this is something that's going to cause questions, confusion, and division amongst people.
Yeah.
Where we all wish that he just would have lived out his life as Pope to the end, for good or for ill. But at least there wouldn't be this batting around going on.
Yeah. Well, right now it's anyway. So it's obvious enough. There's an article written on this thing before Pope's resignation came into place. It was written in Italian, written by a canonist, a priest in northern Italy. He also teaches at the faculty in Bologna, as well as in Modena, as well as in Lugano, which is in Switzerland. And he was quoted recently by the dean of the Vaticanistas. I've forgotten his name for the moment. He's the one who interviewed the Pope for Crossing the Threshold of Hope.
Vittorio Missouri, yes.
And he cites this thing as pointing out that Benedict made it very clear that he was not resigning the ministry of the papacy. He somehow, in his own mind, thinks he can resign from the, he's not resigning from the munus, the office of the papacy, but resigning from the ministry. So there's no such distinction. I mean, I'm not the Pope, but I know there's no such distinction. If you've retained the ministry, if you retain the munus, that is the office of Pope, you have the ministry with you. But yes, I would say, surely, you don't have to go around traveling around the world, going to World Youth Days, and an 80-year-old man or an 85-year-old man having to act like he's a teenager. That's not part of the job of being a Pope.
That's a new aberration, in fact. Yeah. Yes. So anyway, there's a lot to talk about with this, and I know we'll be dealing with it in future programs, but we're out of time on this one. So the Fatima says that the Holy Father will have much to suffer.
Yes.
We know that there's confusion coming from the top, as Cardinal Chappie said, and a diabolic disorientation.
Especially with those who have high places in the church. That's Lucy. And we see that obviously today.
So we've got that today, and we have to maintain the faith and...
it doesn't depend. The faith does not depend upon whether it's Benedict who's the Pope or Francis who's the Pope. The faith depends on what has been handed
the
down.
objective reality of the faith is there, whether the representatives live up to it or not.
Yes. Absolutely.
So we have the obligation to live up to it, and it's the only place we find happiness too. Living up to it. So,
and we're not suggesting anyone should leave the church because of the confusion about the papacy of Francis and Benedict. Not at all.
No. So we keep going and preserving the faith and helping those who are confused.
Yes.
Anyone that we have the influence to help. So that's it for today, and we will see you on the next broadcast.